Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be about what I mentioned in my last video, which is my ADHD and autism diagnosis and journey. It's going to be a long one, so I have timestamped the topics if anyone wants to skip to a specific section. Before I begin, I need to start with a disclaimer. I'm not a physician or a mental health professional, and this video is not intended to encourage anyone to take medication. So I don't want this video to be perceived as the promotion of a specific medicine. If you do wish to seek treatment, please reach out to a qualified healthcare professional. This video is about mental health awareness, my own life, my own journey, and my own experiences. So let's jump into it. So in terms of my background, I've opened up in my previous videos that I've struggled with my mental health my entire life. In the past, I've been clinically diagnosed with depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, and I've experienced panic attacks. I was always told by counselors and psychiatrists that this was due to having undergone childhood trauma, which as a result led to me using food as an unhealthy coping mechanism and then being overweight. I'm not going to talk about specific details of my childhood in this video because it goes against YouTube's monetization policy, but I've opened up in an earlier video, which you can watch if you want to. So there's a strong genetic link between autism and ADHD in biological relatives, and I have several members of my own family who are also neurodivergent. Over the years, my sister has done a lot of research about both autism and ADHD, and last year she pulled me to one side and said to me that she thinks that I might have autism because some of the traits that she's observed in me. This surprised me at the time, but the more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. And then I started to think and go back through my entire life and some of the experiences that I've had. So now I'm going to talk about some of the symptoms that I experience. I'll start by saying that both autism and ADHD present differently in everyone, so there are different manifestations. There's also crossover between autistic and ADHD traits, and there are similar symptoms that AuDHD people go through. So I'll talk about some of the autism symptoms that I experience. Firstly, I need a strict routine. I need predictability. Last year, I had about 2 weeks off work. It got to the end of the year and I'd accumulated so many leave days, which I had to take because I never take extended time off. And during that time, I had no plans, no structure to my days. I was meant to be resting and relaxing, but because I didn't have a routine, I was actually experiencing anxiety every day. And one day I even had a mild panic attack because I didn't know what to do with myself or where I was meant to be on any given day. So I recognize now that having a routine is extremely important for me. I also need consistency in terms of the relationships in my personal life. I need people who are reliable, not people who are going to dip in and out of my life whenever it suits them or whenever they feel like it. In terms of food, I eat the same meals every day. I do meal prep and I always buy the same brands, which honestly has become boring, but I get overwhelmed if there's too much choice. And I'll always just default to familiarity and what I know I like. If I eat out in a restaurant, I'll always extensively research the menu beforehand. Sometimes I'll go to a restaurant and not eat. I'll just sit there and watch my friends eat. But generally, since I had weight loss surgery, I'm not that interested in food anymore. I still get hungry, but it's not something that brings me a lot of joy like it used to when I was overeating, because physically, I can't do that anymore because of the surgery that I had. The next symptom is I don't like it when people invade my personal space. For example, if someone stands too close to me, or if a stranger unexpectedly touches me or gives me a hug, it's very uncomfortable for me. I only feel comfortable with people that I know or I feel like I can trust touching me or being in close proximity to me, or if I initiate it myself. But generally, I don't like people touching me. The next symptom is I understand the difference between sympathy and empathy. However, I struggle to understand why people do certain things in terms of their own motivations, which explains why I've become obsessed with psychology and toxic relationship dynamics, because I have the need to understand why people do certain things. That leads me on to my next one. I have intense specialized interests. I become obsessed with things At the moment, it is spirituality, psychology, toxic relationship dynamics, as I've mentioned, exercise, nutrition, singing, and social media. The next one is I have sensory sensitivities. I'm particularly sensitive to light, loud noises, and certain smells. Bright lights and loud noises are particularly difficult for me. I also can't handle overpowering smells like other people's body odor, certain foods, and also cleaning products like bleach, which makes me feel physically sick. The next symptom is I like wearing tight clothes. It creates a deep pressure, snug type of feeling, which makes me feel safe and soothes me. The next symptom is I experience deep mental exhaustion after social interactions, where afterwards I have to spend a lot of time alone to recover, usually days. The next symptom is that I stim. So stimming is repetitive behaviors. I've always done this, but I've mastered it over the years, so I've hid this trait to fit in. But I've got more comfortable not masking anymore, especially around my family and loved ones. So I repeat certain words, phrases, I make weird noises, or I stick my tongue out a lot, which is self-soothing for me, so it makes me feel happy. If I'm anxious, sometimes at home, I will pace up and down the house while I talk to myself, which again, is comforting for me. So now I'll talk about my ADHD symptoms. ADHD, like autism, is basically having a lower dopamine baseline than a neurotypical person. Our brains can produce dopamine and norepinephrine, but they cannot hold on to them, which it produces, so it gets depleted quicker. For me, this causes mood dysregulation. So I feel emotions intensely, and I have done my entire life. When I'm happy, I get hyperactive. When I'm sad, I feel depressed. When I'm angry, I snap, which is interesting because before I had weight loss surgery, I never had a temper before, but I do now. I'll speak about that later in this video when I talk about my diagnosis and the report which I received, which explains why. In terms of hyperactivity, I have 6 nieces and nephews, some of whom are very young children. And when I spend time with them, I'm always chasing them around the house, screaming or rolling around the floor like a crazy person. And my sister said to me recently, you do realize that they think that you're the same age as them, which explains why I'm their favorite person. The trait that impacts me the most is that my mind races. I'm always having 3 different conversations in my head at any given time. I'll be talking to someone, trying to engage in a conversation, thinking about what to say next. When is it my cue to speak, to say the right thing, while also eavesdropping on people next to me and listening to their conversation and what they're saying, while at the same time, I'll be thinking about my to-do list and all of the things that I need to do later. That happens constantly, 24 hours a day. My mind never switches off. When I'm with people, it leads me to becoming lost in conversations and often staring blankly into space. What happens is my mind slips, and people have recognized that before and asked me, where did you go? Because I'm not fully present or engaged. The next one is I get overstimulated very easily in situations where there are lots of people, bright lights, loud noises and music. For example, going to concerts, bars and nightclubs, or even taking public transport is difficult for me to handle. I don't drink alcohol anymore, and I've been alcohol-free for over 2 years now, which I previously used as a coping mechanism to show up in social situations. And now that I don't drink anymore, I find it challenging navigating those spaces. However, I still do socialize because I recognize that if I didn't, I would end up at home all the time, alone in isolation. But there is definitely a time limit now in terms of the amount of time that I can spend somewhere like a bar or a nightclub. And that's about 90 minutes to 2 hours maximum. And then it's too much for me and I have to leave because I feel overwhelmed. As I mentioned, I get distracted very easily by people, conversations, or noises. I often start a task, get distracted, start something else, and then forget to come back to what I was originally doing. I have excellent long-term memory, but I can't remember something from 5 minutes ago. At home, I will often go into another room to do something and then completely forget why I went in there in the first place. I organize objects at home, so I leave things in places where I know that I will remember them, like my keys, headphones, things that I need for the next day. I will leave them by the front door so I can visibly see them when I leave. I have OCD, and there's a strong correlation between being neurodivergent and having OCD. And I used to think that I only had OCD, but now I realize that I organize things because I don't trust myself to forget something. Every day when I leave home, I will always forget at least one thing. I've locked myself out of the house before and had to pay for a locksmith to let me back in. In terms of my sleep, I have delayed sleep phase. So it often takes me hours to fall asleep because my mind is still racing from the day, even though I'm physically exhausted. When I do eventually go to sleep, I can function on very little sleep. I have a smartwatch which monitors how much sleep I get every night and also my sleep cycles. During the week, I generally average around 4 hours and 38 minutes of sleep a night, which obviously is not good. I usually sleep longer on the weekends for around 7 to 8 hours. There have been days where I've been able to function on about 2 hours of sleep, and I'm still in disbelief as to how I'm able to go about my life on such a small amount. However, it's not something that I like to do because on those days, my anxiety is always worse and I feel more overwhelmed and more overstimulated. It's like a dark cloud is following me around. I also have hypnagogic hallucinations. I've always had these since I was a child, but I never knew what they were before. Basically, in the moments just before I go to sleep, I can see images and moving pictures in my head. It's like my brain starts dreaming whilst my body is still awake. This actually brings me relief, especially if I've been unsuccessfully trying to get to sleep for hours, because in that moment, I know that I'm just about to fall asleep, which is comforting to me. I've also experienced sleep paralysis in the past. So that's where on waking up, my brain wakes up before my body does, which I've always found traumatizing because it's like being in a coma where my body is frozen and physically I can't move or get up, but I'm aware of everything. The next one is things that used to bring me pleasure and interest me before don't anymore. I used to watch a lot of movies and binge watch TV shows. I haven't watched television about 10 months now. I've read that with ADHD, sometimes neural pathways can become burnt out. So you're no longer interested in doing certain hobbies and activities because they don't provide you with dopamine anymore. I also have restless leg syndrome and I fidget and I tap a lot. I put a lot of pressure on my legs and my knees, and I tend to grip things tightly, like the arms of chairs. The next symptom is I feel overwhelmed a lot. That is partly due to the life which I've chosen to live and having so many things to do, having a full-time job, social media platforms, and all of the self-development activities that I've committed myself to doing. This causes constant anxiety and leads to ADHD task paralysis. If a task feels too complicated or overwhelming, I'll have major difficulty starting it or doing it at all, which leads me to procrastinating and leaving things to the last minute. When I was in my final year of university, I had a whole year to write my dissertation. However, I left it to the last moment and wrote it in 5 days. So I recognize now that this is something that I've done my entire life. I'm just fortunate that I'm intelligent enough to always pull things out of the bag at the last moment. Feeling overwhelmed has also led me to being bad at responding to communication. I have a lot of people who message me and I'm in so many group chats with friends. I also get so many emails and DMs, which I'm very slow to respond to, if even at all sometimes. I have hyperfocus, so if something emotionally interests me, I can concentrate on it for hours at a time, like with my social media platforms. This leads me on to my next one, which is I also overthink and ruminate, which I now understand is because I hyperfocus on my own thoughts, which makes whatever I'm feeling worse. I also have intrusive thoughts, which can be distressing. The next one is I have rejection sensitive dysphoria. I am very sensitive to rejection and criticism, even indirect or perceived rejection. If I interpret someone's behavior or a comment as a rejection or a criticism, then I would take it personally and not put myself in that same situation again with that person in the future. In the past, romantically, I've only ever pursued people who were avoidant and people who didn't love me back because I was scared of putting myself in a position to be rejected and feeling vulnerable. In regards to self-criticism, it has led to perfectionism, where I feel like I have to appear perfect all the time, never show vulnerability or ask for help. I then speak negatively to myself, catastrophize, and always assume the worst in situations, which leads me to being extremely hard on myself. It has also led to people pleasing, where I've sacrificed my own needs, wants, and desires for other people. I can be impulsive and spontaneous, but maybe not in the typical way that other people with ADHD might experience. I've not experienced things like alcohol, drugs, or sex addiction. My impulsivity presents more in a creative way, specifically in terms of my social media and the topics which I decide to post about. One of my friends commented a while ago that my content is all over the place and I'm very unpredictable, which is fair. If you want to be successful as a content creator, you have to create brand recognition, which means finding a lane, sticking to it, and being known for one specific thing. Whereas I just create content based on whatever random idea comes into my head at the time, which is definitely a result of my frenetic ADHD brain. I'm very impatient. I hate waiting in traffic, in lines, in queues, or waiting for my turn. It feels agonizing for me. I have overshared certain things about my personal life with people in the past, which I wish I hadn't done. I have just blurted things out before, but now I make a conscious decision not to tell people certain things. So I've become a very private person, which requires a lot of mental effort not to tell people things. In terms of the crossover symptoms, I have been experiencing burnout for over a year now. I'm someone who's become a workaholic. I'm constantly working. I work every day, in the evenings and on the weekends. I never take extended time off from work, and I also don't get enough sleep, which I am working on. Music is something that has always been very important to me. When I listen to music, specifically EDM, my brain releases dopamine, which gives me a rush, and I often listen to the same song on repeat for hours. When I combine that with exercising, it has the most noticeable positive effect on my mood. As I mentioned before, there's a heavy overlap between traits of both conditions. However, some of the traits are completely contradictory, which leads to a clash. So they fight a battle internally against each other. The autism creates structure, predictability, and routine. However, the ADHD needs novelty and stimulation. This leads me to feeling constantly restless and feeling bored all of the time because I'm understimulated, which actually feels agonizing. So I always just end up working as I feel like I have to be doing something productive with my time. I have the mindset that time is the one thing in life that you will never get back. So I have now received a formal diagnosis for both ADHD and autism. What surprised me is that my ADHD is actually worse than the autism, as I thought it was actually the other way around, but I guess it doesn't matter really. In terms of ADHD, I scored 7 out of 9 for hyperactivity and impulsivity, and I scored 7 out of 9 for inattentive. So I have the combined type, and in the report, the doctor noted that has been significantly impacting my quality of life. One interesting thing that he observed is that before I had weight loss surgery, I was compulsively overeating every day, which was likely my main source of dopamine. And now that I don't do that anymore, because I eat very little, it explains why all of my symptoms have become more pronounced, which is because my brain is now dopamine starved. So in essence, my ADHD has got worse and come to the forefront since I had weight loss surgery, which explains why my mood is so dysregulated now and why my personality has changed. I mentioned before that I have a temper now, which obviously is not good. I do control it, especially in professional environments like work, as I know how to behave. However, in my personal life, I have snapped a few times, which my loved ones have unfortunately witnessed and been very surprised by, because before I'd always been a gentle-natured person. So now I'm going to talk about treatment. There isn't medication to treat autism in the same way that there is for ADHD, but there are support strategies and coping mechanisms that can help. I decided to have ADHD treatment, which is a personal decision. I know some people are against taking medication. Overall, I'm a lot happier within myself since I had weight loss surgery and began my healing journey. However, my mood is still dysregulated. I feel extreme emotions from intense happiness and euphoria to sadness and then anger, which I don't want to feel so intensely anymore. I've also seen other people that I know struggle with ADHD. I know 4 other people who have it, and I've seen them struggle with their mental health and things like addiction. I also listened to an ADHD podcast recently, and one of the speakers used the analogy that if you go to the opticians and they tell you that you need to wear glasses, you're not going to spend the rest of your life squinting. You're going to try wearing glasses. He said that the same is true with medication. You should at least try it and see if it works for you. And that is something that really struck a chord with me. For me personally, I have to at least try it. If it doesn't work, then I can stop it at any time if I want to. In terms of support from my loved ones, it's been about 50-50, I would say. For the most part, they don't want me to take medication. That's due to concerns about the side effects, specifically my weight. They're worried about me losing more weight, especially because I lost so much weight in such a short amount of time. And one of the main side effects of ADHD medication is weight loss. But they respect my choice. I'm an adult. It's my life at the end of the day, and I make my own decisions, which ultimately they respect. So now I'm going to talk about medication. I have been taking medication for about a month now. As I said before, I can't mention the name of the medicine. However, it is a stimulant. I've had some side effects, mainly mild headaches and weight loss. I've lost about 7 pounds since I started taking it. But because of the weight loss surgery that I had, I now eat a lot less than a regular person. So perhaps it affects me more because of that. I've also had insomnia as a side effect. So I've been sleeping less, but I haven't felt tired during the day, which is interesting. I've also noticed that my body temperature has increased. I used to feel cold all of the time because I'm slightly anemic, but now I'm warm all of the time. From what I understand, that's because the medicine works by speeding up your metabolism. In terms of the changes, it's been very positive for me so far. My mood is a lot more stable. I don't feel extreme emotions anymore. I just feel generally happy all of the time. I don't procrastinate anymore. It's very easy for me to start tasks and finish them to completion, even ones which are complex. I no longer have task paralysis. So instead of thinking, I'll do it later, I now do things straight away. So yes, it's made me very productive. It's also made it easier for me to tap into my hyperfocus now. But there is a warning there because from what I understand and what I've read, the medication doesn't help you differentiate between exactly what you hyperfocus on. So you can fixate on the wrong things. I spent a whole day the other day cooking and cleaning and did nothing on my to-do list and ignored my phone all day. So it's important to have a plan for the day and then stick to it because you can get stuck doing the wrong thing. While I'm taking the medication, it's important for me to maintain the healthy coping mechanisms which I've built over the past few years, which is where I get my dopamine from. So that is sleep, exercise, listening to music, singing, spending time with my loved ones, and working on my social media platforms, because that actually increases my dopamine levels. And then the medication will work better for me by ensuring that the higher levels of dopamine are maintained and not depleted by my brain. So on a personal note, it has been difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that I have both ADHD and autism. Some of that is around the stigma that autism is a disability and that ADHD is a behavioral disorder. But I always felt different growing up, like I was an alien, but I never had any indication that I was neurodivergent. I've seen 4 different therapists in the past few years who all gave detailed reports, and none of them even picked up on it. They just said what everyone has told me my entire life. You've experienced childhood trauma, you have depression, anxiety, OCD, and you're overweight. While all of those things were true, the underlying issue is that I was neurodivergent. I think what I struggle with, it's not that people missed it, it's that so many people looked at the symptoms without recognizing the underlying cause. But nobody ever stopped and asked why they were all showing up together. So when my sister was the person who first recognized it, it was both validating and frustrating at the same time. As part of my assessments, my mum had to complete interview questions, and on reflection, she did recognize that I had exhibited traits my entire life. I was hyperactive when I was a child, and I did misbehave sometimes, which is a sign of ADHD. As a young boy, I also had hundreds of toy cars, and I would sit in my bedroom alone for hours and organize them all in a line rather than go outside and play with my siblings, which is also a sign of autism. My mum has apologized, which she didn't need to do at all, and I don't have any resentment towards her. I was her first child. She had me when she was a teenager. She was a single parent, and she did the best job she could do with the information that she had at the time. The day after I received my diagnosis, I was at work and went for a walk on my lunch break. The office that I work in is near a busy town centre, and that day it was warm and sunny outside. There were hundreds of people out and about shopping. There was a busker singing. There was a man preaching religion loudly on a sound system. There were people walking towards me from all directions, and then a homeless man started talking to me, asking for money. I started to feel anxious and overwhelmed, and since I now know that I'm neurodivergent, the realization sunk in that I'm just overstimulated, which made me feel really sad, because I feel like if I knew this information earlier in life, I would have understood myself better, especially in terms of why I've always felt the way that I do and why I react the way that I do. And maybe then I would have made different decisions in the past, but you can only do what you can do with the information that you are equipped with at the time. But now everything which I've struggled with in terms of my mental health all makes sense. For the first time in my life, I don't feel broken. I feel like I finally understand myself. So finding out at the age of 40 has been hard for me. And honestly, I'm still processing it, but I have so many good people in my life who uplift me every day and tell me to use being neurodivergent as a superpower. And now that I know what hyperfocus is, I've definitely been abusing it recently. I also feel like in the past, some people have misjudged me. People have told me that I'm too sensitive, too emotional, or I take things personally, which made me feel like my emotions were being used against me. And over time, it made me feel like there was something that I had to hide. It taught me to bottle things up. It taught me not to share. And it made me feel like the way I experienced the world was somehow wrong, when really I was experiencing it through a neurodivergent nervous system that I didn't understand at the time. I've also experienced things where different people have disrespected me, not been honest with me, ghosted me, or not given me closure. And because of my ADHD, I now recognize that I've hyper-focused on these situations from the past. I've hyper-focused on my own thoughts, which explains why I find it hard to forgive people. I know that forgiveness and closure come from within, which I am working on, but for some neurodivergent people, uncertainty can become incredibly difficult to process. We end up replaying conversations in our minds, searching for answers, and trying to make sense of something that no longer has access to an explanation. For me, honesty has always felt kinder than ambiguity. I would rather have the cold, hard truth any day over being mollycoddled, because I know I'm not weak. I know I'm not a victim. Every challenge I've ever faced in life, I've overcome. And I've done that by never giving up on myself. Looking back, there are moments where I wish things had been recognized sooner, not because I want someone to blame, but because understanding myself earlier might have saved me years of confusion. At the same time, I also recognize that people can only work with the information they have available at the time. My mum did her best. The professionals I saw were trying to help, and I made the best decisions I could with the understanding that I had. So there is no resentment there, just acceptance. I can't change the past. At this point in my life, I'm more self-aware now than I've ever been. I'm still doing the shadow work, and I'm committed to continue to do the work and show up as my real, authentic self. I spent 40 years trying to understand what was wrong with me, and then discovered that nothing was wrong with me at all. My brain just works differently. Now that I finally have the missing piece of the puzzle in terms of why I've struggled with my mental health my entire life, the life that I'm building now going forward is an apology to myself. And I'm about to get savage with it. I have big dreams and ambitions, and I finally feel ready to pursue them as my full, authentic self. If you've watched this far, thank you. For most of my life, I felt different. I felt like everyone else had been given an instruction manual for life that somehow I never received. I spent years trying to understand why I struggled with certain things, why I felt emotions so intensely, why I became overwhelmed, why my mind never seemed to switch off. And now, at the age of 40, I finally have an answer. Not an excuse, an explanation. And there is a difference. This diagnosis doesn't change who I am. I'm still the same person, the same son, the same brother, the same friend, the same content creator. The only difference is now I understand myself better. And there is something incredibly freeing about that, because for years I thought I needed to fix myself. But what I've realized is that I don't need fixing. I need understanding. I need self-compassion. I need the right tools and support. So if you're watching this and you've recently been diagnosed, or if you're questioning whether or not you might be neurodivergent, I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain just works differently. And different doesn't mean broken. For me, this diagnosis wasn't the start of my story. It was the final piece of the puzzle. And now that I finally have it, I feel more hopeful about the future than I ever have before. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the notification bell, comment below, and like and subscribe for more healing content. Thank you so much. I love you. Take care. Have a blessed day. See you soon. Bye.